Imagine a world split in two, a world where two superpowers dominate the global stage, each with its own ideology and vision for the future. On one side, the United States and its allies championed democracy and capitalism, promoting free markets and individual freedoms. On the other, the Soviet Union, a communist superpower, held sway over Eastern Europe, advocating for a state-controlled economy and a single-party system. This was the reality of the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry and suspicion that gripped the globe for decades. Both sides engaged in a relentless competition for influence, power, and technological supremacy. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union faced deep-seated problems. Its centralized economy was struggling, unable to innovate or meet the needs of its people. Its economy stagnated, unable to keep pace with the West. Long queues for basic goods and widespread shortages became a common sight. The costly arms race strained its resources, diverting funds from essential services and infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Afghanistan war further drained its strength, both economically and morally, as the conflict dragged on with no end in sight. The Soviet people, yearning for greater freedoms and opportunities, grew increasingly disillusioned. Protests and public dissent became more frequent, signaling a growing unrest. Amidst this turmoil, a new leader emerged, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was a reformer, determined to address the systemic issues plaguing the Soviet Union. Assuming power in 1985, Gorbachev inherited a system on the brink of collapse. He understood that without significant changes the Soviet Union could not survive. He recognized the urgent need for change and set in motion a series of reforms that would ultimately unravel the Soviet Empire. His policies of Glasnost and Perestroika aimed to open up the society and restructure the economy, but they also unleashed forces that he could not control. Mikhail Gorbachev was unlike any Soviet leader before him. Charismatic and relatively young, he brought a fresh perspective to the Kremlin. Gorbachev understood that the Soviet system, rigid and stagnant, could not survive without drastic changes. He envisioned a more open and prosperous society, one that could compete on the world stage. Gorbachev's reforms centered around two key concepts: Glasnost and Perestroika. These twin pillars of his reform agenda aimed to revitalize the Soviet Union and usher in a new era of openness, transparency, and economic dynamism. However, these reforms, intended to strengthen the Soviet system, ultimately unleashed forces that would lead to its demise. Glasnost, meaning openness, sought to dismantle the culture of secrecy and censorship that had long permeated Soviet society. Gorbachev believed that by encouraging open dialogue and debate, he could foster greater trust and engagement among the Soviet people. Censorship relaxed, allowing for greater freedom of expression in the media and the arts. For the first time, Soviet citizens could openly criticize the government and discuss previously taboo topics. This newfound freedom unleashed a torrent of pent-up frustrations and grievances as people grappled with decades of repression and economic hardship. The floodgates of dissent had been opened, and there was no turning back. Perestroika, meaning restructuring, aimed to overhaul the Soviet Union's stagnant economy. Centralized planning and state control had stifled innovation and efficiency for decades. Gorbachev sought to introduce elements of market economics, encouraging private initiative and competition. These reforms, however, proved difficult to implement. The Soviet bureaucracy, resistant to change, hampered efforts to restructure the economy. Moreover, Perestroika inadvertently exacerbated existing economic problems, leading to shortages and inflation. The Soviet people, accustomed to guaranteed employment and social benefits, grew increasingly disillusioned as the economy sputtered. The Iron Curtain crumbles. Gorbachev's reforms had a profound impact beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. Across Eastern Europe, satellite states chafed under Soviet domination. Inspired by the winds of change sweeping through the USSR, they too began to demand greater freedom and autonomy. In 1989, a wave of revolutions, largely peaceful, swept across Eastern Europe. The Berlin Wall, a potent symbol of Cold War division, crumbled under the weight of popular protest. From Poland to Hungary, from East Germany to Romania, communist regimes collapsed one after another. Cracks in the foundation. The collapse of the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe had profound consequences for the USSR itself. Nationalist sentiments, long suppressed under Soviet rule, resurfaced with a vengeance. Republics within the Soviet Union, sensing weakness at the center, began to assert their own identities and aspirations for independence. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, led the charge for independence, followed by other republics seeking greater autonomy. Gorbachev faced a growing dilemma: how to hold the Soviet Union together while accommodating the aspirations of its increasingly restless republics. In August 1991, hardline communists, alarmed by the centrifugal forces tearing the Soviet Union apart, launched a desperate coup against Gorbachev. They placed him under house arrest, hoping to reverse his reforms and preserve the Soviet system. However, the coup backfired spectacularly. Ordinary Russians, inspired by the taste of freedom and unwilling to return to the repression of the past, took to the streets in protest. The coup leaders, lacking popular support and facing defiance from within their ranks, faltered. December 1991. This month marked a pivotal moment in world history, as one of the most powerful political entities of the 20th century came to an end. The failed August coup proved to be a fatal blow to the Soviet Union. The coup, orchestrated by hardline members of the Communist Party, aimed to halt the reforms initiated by Mikhail Gorbachev. However, it only served to expose the deep fractures within the Soviet system. Gorbachev, released from house arrest, found his authority irreversibly weakened. His vision of a reformed Soviet Union was now in tatters, and his political power diminished significantly. The coup had not only failed, but had also accelerated the disintegration of the Soviet state. The republics, emboldened by the coup's failure and the center's waning power, accelerated their push for independence. Nationalist movements gained momentum, and the desire for self-determination became unstoppable. The Baltic states were among the first to declare their independence, setting a precedent for others to follow. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as the Soviet Union's president. His resignation speech was a somber acknowledgement of the inevitable. He spoke of the achievements and failures of the Soviet era, and the need for a new path forward. The Soviet flag, bearing the hammer and sickle, was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin. This symbolic act marked the end of an era, as the world watched the dissolution of a superpower that had once rivaled the United States. The Soviet Union, after more than 70 years of existence, ceased to be. Its dissolution was a moment of profound change, not only for the people of the former Soviet republics but for the entire world. The geopolitical landscape was forever altered. In its place emerged 15 independent states, marking the end of an era. These new nations faced the daunting task of building their own identities and governance structures, while the world watched with anticipation and uncertainty. Mikhail Gorbachev's legacy is complex and contested. As the last leader of the Soviet Union, his tenure was marked by significant reforms and dramatic changes. He is both hailed as a hero who ended the Cold War, and condemned as the man who presided over the collapse of his own country. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the wave of protests across Eastern Europe were pivotal moments that defined his leadership. His reforms, while well-intentioned, unleashed forces that he ultimately could not control. The policies of Glasnost and Perestroika aimed to open up the Soviet society and economy, but they also exposed deep-seated issues that had been festering for decades. Gorbachev's commitment to peaceful change, however, is undeniable. His negotiations with Western leaders led to significant arms reduction treaties and a de-escalation of global tensions. He refused to use force to suppress pro-democracy movements in Eastern Europe or to crush dissent within the Soviet Union itself. This decision, while controversial, showcased his dedication to human rights and political freedom. While his legacy remains a subject of debate, his impact on the course of history is undeniable. Gorbachev's actions not only changed the Soviet Union, but also had a profound effect on the entire world. He brought the world closer to peace and helped usher in a new era, even as his own country crumbled around him. His receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990 was a testament to his efforts in promoting global harmony and reducing the threat of nuclear war. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights and updates.